Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. I'm not satisfied when I learn something new unless I share it forward. And so we created this podcast to continue that, to share forward the wonderful people we get to meet and most importantly get to learn from and make our lives richer and better. Together we'll cover the human experience. And for me, the human experience is foundational in the idea of relationships. The topics will be far-reaching, but the common element you'll see here is it's all about relationships. So I invite you to join us on this journey. Come experience it with us, share your thoughts and ideas, and become part of our community. We'd love to have you.
Is the American dream alive and well? If you ask today's guest, Ken Langone, he'd certainly say yes. Ken's grandparents immigrated to the U.S. from Italy, and he grew up in a family that he describes as having a lot of love, but not a lot of money. In his early years, Ken spent time in the U.S. Army and dug ditches for the Long Island Expressway before going to Bucknell University to study economics. After graduation, he began a career on Wall Street and earned his MBA at NYU. He then became an early investor and co-founder of a little company called the Home Depot, which is today's largest home improvement retailer with approximately 500,000 associates and 2,300 stores in the US, Canada, and Mexico. After Ken's business success, he donated $10 million to NYU's MBA program in 1999. Then in 2008, in support of advancing medical technology and education, Ken gave $200 million to the university's medical center, which was renamed NYU Langone Health in his honor. In August of 2018, Ken pledged $100 million to its School of Medicine, a donation that effectively made tuition free. And today, Ken sits as the chair of the Board of Trustees at NYU Langone Medical Center. In this episode, Ken and Jim focus on relationships, covering everything from parenting and affection to building better connections in the workplace. And of course, touch on that entrepreneurial spirit at the core of both Ken and Jim's careers. Listen in on Celebrations Chatter.
Tell me, that was an amazing meeting last week at NYU Langone. You must be so proud. You know, and I think of...
We all should be proud. You should be proud of what you guys did out in Minneapolis.
We all are proud of you. We're proud of what's been accomplished there and it is continuing to happen there. The amazing achievement, you know, and I think of knowing you as a friend and a mentor and as a hero. And I think about, you know, the big public achievements in your life. Obviously, the career you had on Wall Street, creating your own investment firm, all the Wall Street victories you had. And then, of course, the financing and founding of Home Depot, huge, big public success and an amazing accomplishment. And now the whole NYU Langone chapter, which I frankly think is your biggest professional accomplishment.
By far, Jim. The greatest satisfaction, other than my family, is the medical center.
And to reach the #1 status as a teaching health system by so many counts in the period of time that you've done, and of course, if you're the best teaching health center in the United States, you're de facto the best teaching health system in the world. What an amazing accomplishment, and what a team you've built. Every time I interact with the team there at a board meeting or whatever interaction I have, I'm amazed at the sense of culture that exists at NYU Langone.
I tell people have asked me the question, what do we do different at Home Depot that we didn't do at the medical center? And I shock them. I said, let me tell you the truth. The same thing that we did to motivate the kids on the floor in the store with aprons on, these are kids that barely got out of high school, we do with the doctors that have got any number of degrees and are neurosurgeons and are scientists of the highest order. We all want to feel like we can matter. I don't care what your walk in life is or what your station in life is. You want to wake up in the morning and say, you know what? I'm getting up today and I'm going to make a difference in the world. I matter. When you do that, and by the way, saying it is one thing, living it is something else altogether. You know, you walk past a guard in the lobby at the hospital and you go up to them and you say to them, hey, listen, thanks so much for all you do for us. Our patients are very appreciative of what you do. Cost you nothing. But when you walk away from the guy, he says to himself, hey, you know what? I'm not just a guard. I'm on the team. I matter. I make a difference.
As corny as it is and seems, to see the expression on that officer's face, which a second ago was grizzled and now is warm and thoughtful, it makes a difference. And as you say, what does it cost us?
Nothing. You got to be careful, because in doing it, you've got to be sincere. I tell people that the three most powerful forces I know in life are a kind word, a thoughtful gesture, and passion and enthusiasm for everything you're doing. Look at what you've done with flowers. Look at what you've done with Harry and David. People know, Jim, that it's not just an investment, or it's not just a company. It's a way of life. People know that when you put your name to something, it takes on special meaning over and above and beyond whether you make money or whether you create jobs. All those things are important. But the most important thing is for people to know, hey, this guy really is into this thing. He means it. And I want to be part of it.
People make fun of the fact that I when I'm in the office, whatever office I'm in, I'm walking around. I want to meet people, and I can't walk past a piece of paper on the floor without bending over to pick it up. Now, I will tell you, it takes me a little longer to get up now than it used to, but I still do it, and I just can't help it. It's how I was raised.
When I walk a Home Depot store, I usually have 8 or 9 kids. They'll get around me. We'll walk the store and look for the in stocks and look at what's the new products and so forth. And honest to God, I pray to God, there's something, a piece of litter on the floor that I can bend down and pick it up. Now, the kid will come to me and say, I'll get rid of that. I'll say, no, I'll wait till I find a waste bin. Something as simple as that says to them, hey, you know what? He's doing the same thing I'm doing. So what I'm doing matters, because if he's doing it, must matter. He's a big shot. People need to know that they add value. People need to know that they're part of whatever the achievement is. And you do that, Jim, and watch just the human energy that pours from these people in a very constructive, positive way.
The payoff for that was last Tuesday when we had our board meeting. I was leaving. I had to run to another event. And right. I came down the elevator lobbies, and I'm crossing the very big lobby at Kimmel to go to the revolving doors. And there's a young lady in front of me, maybe 20 steps in front of me, in a purple uniform. There was as the doors were rolling, it created a wind and it blew a piece of paper across. Without thinking, she instinctually bent down, grabbed it, crumpled it up, head out the door, and put it in the wastebasket just outside the revolving doors. I said, that's evidence of culture.
The simple, littlest things. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to go to somebody and say, boy, am I glad you're here, because you're going to make a difference. I love to do it with the guards, because most people just look at a guard and walk past them like they're inhuman, that they're inanimate. These guys would give anything. I go to St. Pat's in the morning, and I go in. On my way up, I always stop when I'm walking up the steps on Fifth Avenue. If there's a cop at the top of the steps, I say, hey, guys, thanks a lot for all you do for us. 2 seconds. But that guy says, you know what? I must be doing something important. He's protecting us. He's doing the most important thing in life. He's protecting and saving us. That's the game, Jim.
What do you do, Ken, particularly with the next generation, to make Thanksgiving a meaningful holiday for them? It's a meaningful holiday for all of us because oftentimes we're getting together, we celebrate, we get time off, we get time with family. Is there anything you do to try and impress on your grandkids that giving thanks as you do every day is something that they should incorporate into their lives?
Don't wait for Thanksgiving Day to do it. Do it every day. I never end a phone call with my kids where they don't say, I love you, Dad, or I don't say, I love you, Kenny, I love you, Stephen, I love you, Bruce. It's all well and good to have holidays have special meaning, but every day should be a holiday in terms of your affection, in terms of talking to my son this morning, Bruce. He's in the office at 6 o'clock every morning. I called him, and I just out of the blue, I said, Bruce, we had a big meeting yesterday with a deal we're working on, and he carried the load that day, and he was so good. And I said, Bruce, I can't tell you how proud I am to see how you handle that meeting. We need to make an effort, particularly with our people we're closest to. We tend to take great advantage of our kids. We all do. And people say to me, how do you measure? I said, well, I know one thing. Whenever my kids come in a room, they hug me or they kiss me. And whenever I come in a room and they're there, I hug them. Your kids especially need to know that, especially guys like you and me that are highly motivated, that are type A's, that look at what we've accomplished. I wouldn't want to be my son's son. Let me tell you why. How the hell are they going to beat what you did or what I did, Jimmy? Okay? That's a tough hill climb.
So how do you think about managing those expectations? Do you guys talk about the fact that the seismic plates aligned and you had opportunity and they shouldn't be measuring themselves against your worldly successes?
You know what I told my son yesterday morning? I said, Bruce, do me a favor. Don't make any of the same mistakes I made. Make your own mistakes. If I've done something wrong, and I'm sure I have more than once, let them remember I shouldn't do that. Bruce has got a we got a 5-month-old baby. Yesterday, I just had a need to go down. They live down in the village. I had a meeting, and then I got in the car, and Alvaro drove me down. I sat there with my granddaughter in my lap. I thought to myself, how many afternoons did I not do it because I was out slaying dragons? And I've said to them, you can be more successful than I was. Just do it differently than I did it. Don't try and match me because you can't win. Here I am, a plumber's son. Mother worked in a school cafe. You know it, Jimmy. You came from the same hardworking background that we did. We can't fake it. Kids, look at how we live. Our kids come into our homes. This is how Mom and Dad. My parents lived in a little house in Roslyn on 50 by 100 piece of land. I want to assure them that there's so many ways they can be better than me, beginning with the fact of saying, I'm not going to make the same mistakes my father made, whatever they are. Let them understand that there's so many different ways they can add more to what's right about the world than I can, because they got the benefit of what I did. And on top of that, they can go beyond that.
I would tell you, we also have 3 kids, as you know, Ken. And right. I would tell you that I already see that they are much better parents than I was.
Absolutely, Jim.
I was out slaying those dragons way too much.
So was me, Jim. But you know what, Jim? That's why we did it, because we wanted to win.
Yep.
You know, and if you'd have said to me 30 years ago, hey, look, you have to make that trip to California. Wouldn't you rather do this or that with your kids? I'd say, no. I'm worried about my kids. That's why I'm going to California. Yep. We rationalized it. The thing I harbor most of all is the preciousness of values. And let our kids know that through it all, we kept our values intact. You and me, our faith, Jim, think about what our faith means to us and how much our faith has seen us through bad times. Mm-hmm. I wish I had a nickel every time.
Do your kids have a strong sense of faith?
Not like I do. My kids are jaundiced, sadly, by so much of what's happened in the Catholic Church. I think a lot of young people have.
That's for sure.
Cardinal Dolan, who's a dear friend, and I love him to death, I tell him that the impact of what happened with those wayward priests goes far beyond their victims. It's dramatically undermined the moral authority of the Catholic Church. Bruce he felt so strongly about how wrong Vietnam was, and he was in the Marine Corps, that he started an orphanage in Vietnam.
Is that right?
Yeah. And we were there. Lane and I went over to see it, and it just made me feel so good. But I didn't always have the strength of the faith I have now. This came on over a period of years, so I'm hopeful that as they get along further in years, it'll grab them too. But they don't have anywhere near the commitment to faith that I do.
You mentioned the simple life your parents lived, and you mentioned the affection you demonstrate with your kids in public. Were you that way with your parents, with your dad?
Oh, yeah.
Did you hug and kiss your dad in public?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. In fact, I'll tell you a story. They were always physically affectionate. My father used to pinch my cheek, and Mom used to grab me and hug me and hold my hand. And I went off to college. They came up to Parents' Weekend at Bucknell, my first Parents' Weekend, 1953. And Dad came into the fraternity house. I just pledged Sigma Chi, and I extended my hand. A handshake? Well, with these big plumber's hands, he grabbed my hand and he pulled me toward him, and he gave me a hug. And never again did I have any sensitivity about hugging my father. And I felt like, you don't do this in college with all these WASPs. The WASPs don't have the affection. Well, they do, by the way. But in any event, he broke that thing in one split second when he just grabbed my hand, held on to it tighter, just pulled me towards him, put his arms around me, hugged me, and gave me a kiss on my neck. My father Dad was about 5'8", so he was shorter than me, and Mom was 5'6", 5'7". But Jim, that's the insecurity of youth.
No, we were Irish Catholic kids in South Queens,
Right.
South Ozone Park, the interesting neighborhood, and a lot of Italians and Jews around us who were much more affectionate than were the Irish people. At one point, I stopped kissing my dad because I thought it was juvenile. I was the oldest of 5 kids. And it went, I don't know, years, 5, 6, 7 years. And he saw me out in public as a young adult, and I hugged and kissed an older man I'd gotten to know, Italian-American fella. And it was in a restaurant. And my father said to me like a few days later, he said, I saw you when you met so-and-so, you hugged and kissed him, but you stopped hugging and kissing me. I said, well, did you want me to? He goes, it's offended me and hurt me that you stopped. I said, well, I wish you would have brought it up a few years ago.
Right.
From that moment on, I corrected the mistake. And I told that story to my son. So I said, don't ever think that when I greet you in public, that I'm not going to come and embarrass you because I'm coming.
God bless you.
But it hurt me that it hurt my dad, and I didn't.
Sure. Exactly right. And, you learn from that. That's part of the growth experience. Look, you and I at our ages today, we're still capable of growing.
I hope so.
Oh, yeah. I remember as a little boy, I was afraid of the dark. I was 4 years old, I think, 5. And one night, my father put his head into my brother and I shared a little bedroom. And I was there, and he said, are you awake? And I said, yes, I am. He said, why are you awake? I said, I'm afraid of the dark. And he says to me, are you a man or a mouse? And I said, I'm a mouse, Daddy. Years later, after my brother, I had one brother, he was 5 years older than me. He passed away young, very young. At the final viewing, before we went to the church for the Mass, Mom and Dad were in the funeral parlor where my brother was laid out. My father was crying. And I said, Dad, all the years I remember when I was crying, you'd say to me, men don't cry, but boys don't cry. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said, no, boys don't cry, but men do. These are the things, Jim, for whatever reason in society today, we think it's a failing or we think it's a weakness to show affection, to go to somebody and say seriously from your heart, I love you. Kids ask me all the time about books I read, and I always say to them, if I could only give you one book to read for business, it would be the Holy Bible. Every single lesson that you've applied to give you the success you've had and what I've applied to give me is in the Bible, Jim.
It's not in this?
Oh, no. Jim, that's a nice book, but do me a favor. I have to apologize to people when I see them for the bad words. Yeah, you know the story of that. Cardinal Dolan came down to Florida to speak at Lost Tree. We have a series of speakers in the wintertime. And he walked up to the podium. He had 2 books. One was that book
called I Love Capitalism, An American Story by Ken Langone, which, by the way, only came out a few years ago, Ken. But now you can't even find it. They got to reprint it.
I know. They're doing that now.
Oh, they did.
And so he had a book, that book, and he had another book twice as thick. And he got up and he said, he put the books up. He said, now the book on my right is Ken's book without the swear words in it. And the book on my left is Ken's book with the swear words in it. But Jim, for whatever reason, there seems to be a mindset in too many people that to show your affection or to show emotions of any kind is a sign of weakness. I think it's a sign of strength.
Well, I'm trying to learn that, as you say, at any age we can continue to learn, and I'm trying to learn that. And one of the things I think that COVID has taught us, it's not just a big and important relationships. It's not just the love of your wife or your children, but it's all those little incidental contacts we have throughout our day, throughout our lives, or at least we did pre-COVID, that really do accumulate to a body of feelings and relationships and variety of relationships. It's seeing the same usher when you walk into St. Pat's every day, saying hello or waving across the way at them. It's all those little that accumulate into our body of feeling about who we are, what we're worth, and what's important to us in life. And the lesson I learn every day is it's all about relationships.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com. Find the perfect gift.
And wow the people you love.
Wow. This is amazing. Whether you want to say happy birthday. So cute.
Or I love you.
I love you too. Thinking of you.
Wow.
Go to 1-800-Flowers.com. Celebrate the people you love.
When I was running Pressbridge, we had 300 salesmen. I used to say to the salesmen, remember one thing, you're a salesman. The one thing I can guarantee you is people like to do business with people they like. So whatever you're going to do, before you try to sell a guy a bond or a stock, make sure they like you.
Get to know them.
Make the effort. Be genuine. Be authentic. Let them know when you ask them how their family is, you really care how their family is. That you're not just mouthing words that have no feelings or emotion behind them. We've got a wonderful couple that have been with us for 30 years now. And when I get up in the morning and I go out to Mass, Louise is typically in the kitchen, and I walk through the kitchen to go to the garage. I'll say to her, I'm going to say a prayer for you. And she'll come over and give me a big hug. If I don't go to Mass, I know I did something good that day because I know she feels good. It's no weakness to show you have feelings. I know a lot of children are raised in families where keep a stiff upper lip and you can't show. I'm sorry. I don't buy that. I don't buy it.
Speaking of forming relationships at Prestwick, you talked about working with the salespeople to tell them to get to know their people, get them to care about the people who they'd like to do business with. There's a fellow who you convinced to have this small, reasonably unknown firm take them public, a company by a fellow by the name of Ross Perot. How did you get to know Ross, and how did you develop a relationship?
I was at a dinner in Washington on a Saturday night, and the guy sitting next to me at dinner turns out to have been one of Ross Perot's partners. And he mentioned to me they were going to go public. And he was telling me about the company, and I said, gee, that sounds intriguing. I said, is there any chance? And by the way, Jim, I'd never done an IPO before. He said they were interviewing underwriters, and I said, is there any chance that we can get a chance to talk? And he said, sure, I'll give you a call. So Monday he called me. He was back in Dallas. He said, Mr. Perot, I'll see you Wednesday at 11:30. When you walk in at 11:30, be there on time. You got 30 minutes. At 12 o'clock, say goodbye. He's very precise on time. Damn, at 11:30, the door opens just exactly as Jack Height, that was the fellow's name, tells me. I sit down. Hi, fellas, Ross Perot. Hello, Mr. Perot. Ken Langone. Well, these fellas, we're getting ready to go public. He said, let me tell you what I'm hearing from all of these fellas. He talked about what Goldman said and what Merrill said and what Whitewell said and Kenneth Peabody. When he got done, he said, what do you think of what I said? I said, well, Mr. Perot, I said, it's about 1 minute to 12. I think I'll say goodbye. Maybe the next time I'm down this way, I'll get some time that I can share with you about what we do. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I was told that you've got a very busy schedule and 12 o'clock was all you get. No, he said, forget that. What do you think of what I said? Now, Ross was notorious for not using bad words. I sat there for a minute and I said, what do you do? And I said, Mr. Perot, with all due respect, that's the biggest pile of horse shit I've ever heard in my life. And he went back. What do you mean? We talked until 1 o'clock the next morning. He was driving me around Dallas that night looking for a drugstore because I was going back on a 3 o'clock in the afternoon plane, looking for a toothbrush and toothpaste, shaving stuff. He was going to make his decision on who he was going to use the following week. The following Monday, he called me and said he was pushing back the decision. He wanted to get to know me a little better. And could I, when I come down to see him, could I bring down the prospectuses of all the deals I've done? Oh, shit. This is going to be the shortest act on Broadway. So I get down there, and I'm praying to God he forgot he asked for it. By the way, every time I came to see him, he would pick me up at the airport, and he would bring me back. He would drive himself. So we met for another 3 hours, and we talked how I would do this, how I would do that. I said, Mr. Perot, at the end of the day, the bet you're making is, I'm going to tell you what I think your company's worth. And your bet is, can I sell the stock at the price I told you it's worth? That's your bet. I said, it's that simple. And if you have faith in the person and your judgment's right, you're going to have a good deal. So anyway, nothing said about the prospecti. We drive to the airport. I get out of the car, and I go, thank God you never brought it up. Just as I'm getting out of the car, by the way, he said, did you bring those prospecti down with you? I said, no, sir, I didn't. You forget them? I said, no. Where are they? I said, there aren't. He said, what do you mean? I said, you'll be the first. And he looked at me. He says, you've never done a deal before? I said, I've never done a deal before. But I said, if I can't do this deal, I'll quit. All I can tell you, Jim, he and I had a relationship predicated totally on openness and honesty. To know him and have him as a friend was one thing. But when the family asked me if I deliver a eulogy at his funeral, that was about as good as it got. when you ask how the relationship was formed, it was always formed on a basis of honesty and directness. He was going to take over a baking company, Campbell Taggart Baking Company, and he needed $100 million. We were up at New England Mutual Insurance to borrow the $100 million. And in the meeting, it was clear what New England Mutual needed to get it done, Ross would have a problem with. So I'm trying to figure a way out to give them something of what they need and yet get the deal done. We went back to the hotel, and Perot was in a fit. He said, "You work for me, you work for them." I said, "I work for you." "Well, damn it, listen to that meeting with you and them. You're conniving with them to get me." And I said, "Ross, every single thing I said to them was predicated on, was it good for you?" And I said, "If you'd like, let's stay right here." And we sat in the hotel room, and I went down point for point of how he benefited by what I was proposing to them, better than what the deal was that he wanted.
What happened to the deal?
Oh, we didn't do it because the baking company was a mess. And thank God we didn't do it, because he'd have been in a hole $100 million.
Wow.
And the last story I'll tell you about him was the night before, years ago, there was a transfer tax in New York State. So when you did an underwriting, you signed all the documents in Jersey. So the deal was technically done in Jersey, New York State transfer tax. The night before the IPO, 1968, Ross and Margot and Elaine and I had dinner at 21. And after dinner, Elaine had to go back home because the kids had to go to school in the morning. And Margot and I and Ross drove through the tunnel to New Jersey to get off the tunnel, to get off on the side, sign the document. And by the way, the witness was always the driver of the car. So we had a driver. We're driving, and I told him that I was going to do the deal at 100 times earnings, which is an insane number. Wall Street said, "They're crazy. He can't do it. He can't do it." So we're driving through the tunnel, and we're in a limousine that's got back seats that look at each other. So Ross is looking forward, and I'm looking backward. I'm sitting opposite Margot. And Ross said, "Well," he said, "I guess when you're going to tell me I'm not getting 100 times earnings." I said, "What do you mean?" "Yeah, so all your buddies in Wall Street told me you said 100 times, but watch and see, Ross. At the last minute, he's going to tell you, 'Sorry, Ross, best I can do is 60 or 70 or 80, whatever number is.'" I said, "Well, what are you asking? Well, you're going to do it at 100 times earnings?" I said, "No, Ross, I'm sorry. We're not going to do it at 100 times earnings." "See, Margo, they do it all the time to us poor people down south. They get us up here and they skin us. They skin us." I said, "Ross, take it easy. Take it easy." I said, "You want 100 times earnings?" "Damn right I do." He said, "Let me tell you about Texas. You put your hand out and you shake a guy's hand, you got a deal." I said, "Okay, we'll do it at 100 times earnings." I had winked to Margo when he was in his fit. She caught it. She said, "Well, Ken," she said, "you're doing it at 100 times earnings. What were you going to do it at?" I said, "Well, Margo, I was going to do it at 115 times, but he only wants 100. And that's how it happened, Jim.
And the rest is history with EDS.
That was a pivotal point in my career. I was 32 years old. I'd never done a deal before. I had a pretty good record of selling in Wall Street, and I was betting on my ability to sell him and his company to investors. And I was right. And we brought it out at $16.50 a share, which was 115 times earnings. And within a year, it was at $170 a share.
Extraordinary guy who could just think enormous size things, right?
Oh, yeah. He had a vision about everything. You know, Jim, the tragedy is he would have been a fabulous president.
But how many people do we know would be fabulous presidents and aren't good candidates? It's a different skill set.
You're right, Jim. You know why? They're not good candidates because too many of them can't lie. You know, you think about it, Jim. I mean, I watched this debate the other night. The guy out and out lied. And they all do it. I'm not just saying
everybody.
They lie.
We vote on some sets of what we think are qualities, but it takes a different set of qualities to lead and to govern.
I see what you've done with your career and with your businesses and how successful you've been. There's a common thread that goes through all of us. And that's simple. And that's asking, what can I do to make the world a little bit better for somebody else tomorrow? That if I didn't do it, it wouldn't be done and they wouldn't have it. Putting somebody's interest other than your own ahead of your own goes a long way. Look, we're all tough deal makers. You know, we sit in a room and make a deal. I'm going to do all I can do to get the best deal I can, and you're going to do all you can. But at the end of the day, There are these wonderful people in life that turn their lives over to us and expect us to make these monumental decisions that'll affect their lives, and they trust us that as part of those decisions, we're taking into account how much better we can help them live a better life.
Ken, speaking of relationships, at some point you decided to go out on your own. You created your own firm. And how did you come across these couple of fellas from Atlanta who thought they had an idea for a different kind of hardware store?
I had a client in Philadelphia. His business was in trouble. He had some hardware stores. And I said, back then the industry was fragmented. So you had Rickle, Pergamon, Channel up here, Scotty's in the South, Payless Cashways in the Midwest. They were all like fiefdoms. And they all knew each other, and they never competed.
But they were the first generation of bigger than your neighborhood hardware stores.
Right, home centers, like Channel and Rickle and Pergamon.
Yeah, I remember those three names from the New York metro area.
And so I said to Gary Obama, I said, who's the best in the business? He was the guy in California by the name of Bernie Marcus. I said, he's bankrupt. He said, no, he's not. Well, sure enough, long story short, I went back to my office, looked in the manuals. He wasn't bankrupt. I called him up. Crazy thing, it was 1975. His stock was selling for 2 times earnings. He was public, called Handy Dan Home Improvement Center.
Yeah, oh, yes, yeah.
I went out that night. I went out that next morning to meet him in L.A. We hit it off. I ended up buying almost all the stock in the hands of the public for clients. He persuaded me to sell it. His company was 80% owned by a holding company, 20% by the public. He persuaded me to sell my 20% back to this guy, bad guy by the name of Sandy Sigaloff. I told him, if I do that, you're going to get fired. Well, about a year before this, Bernie and I were walking through a new Handy Dan store in Houston, and I was all excited about what they had done with the store. And he said, don't get too excited. There's something out there. If somebody does it, it's going to change the whole industry. Tell me. Can't tell you. I don't want anybody to know it. So now we're back to where he wants me to sell the guy the stock. I sell it to him. 3 months later, sure enough, Bernie got fired. Called me on a Saturday afternoon. He needs a job. He's got 3 kids. He's got no money. Arthur got fired. He got fired. I said, Bernie, how soon can you get to New York? I can get there tonight. It was around 2 o'clock Saturday afternoon, New York time. I met him the next morning. I went to Mass Sunday morning. I met him at Peacock Alley. And I sat there with him, and he had brought a lawyer with him to explain why he was fired. So I said to the guy, I started by saying, this guy, I need to know one thing. What's that? I said, is he going to jail? He said, what do you mean, jail for what? What, Bernie's going, well, you can't run a company from jail. What company? What company? I said, we're going to start the company you told me about that you wouldn't tell me what it was.
Back walking the store in Houston.
You told me that whoever did it would dramatically change the industry. I said, we're going to do it. Well, I've got no money. I said, don't worry about it. I'll get the money. That was easier said than done, by the way.
I bet.
And that's how we started it. The thing I could tell you, truthfully, we've always put the best interest of the kids on the floor ahead of everything else in the company. And it's those kids that are the secret sauce at Home Depot. The kids that put an apron on. And that's how we did it, Jim. And to this day, that culture is what makes Home Depot what it is.
And there was a time, Ken, a painful time, when you brought in a guy who you thought was really going to do a great job there, you and the team, a guy by the name of Bob Nardelli, who's an accomplished, terrific guy,
but
didn't have the same sense and importance of culture.
To Bob's credit, the first 4 years he was there, don't forget, Jim, we were opening up 200 stores a year. We were opening a store every other day. All the mistakes we made in the stores that were in operation was camouflaged by the volume out of the new stores. Mm-hmm. We reached a point where we were about out of places to put stores.
That's an important point of reckoning for big box retailers.
You got it, Jim. The first 4 years Bob was there, he really fixed everything up, the low-hanging fruit, I call it. After he got rid of after he benefited from the low-hanging fruit, he began to cut in on muscle. And he didn't understand the importance of the culture in the company, how important it was for that kid when he came to work every morning to say, I've got to do the best I can do for the customer that I see today. Bob didn't buy into that. Bob was a numbers guy. He was a typical big business industrial guy. Show me the numbers, show me the numbers. With all due respect, he did the right thing for 4 years, but the last 2 years, it was clear that he was going in a direction that was not constructive, and we agreed to go separate ways. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, he brought a guy in by the name of Frank Blake. He was a lawyer. He was a Harvard undergraduate, Columbia graduate, law school graduate, clerk to Justice Stevens of the Supreme Court, only 9 of them a year. Then he went to the Department of Energy as the number 2 guy. Nardelli brought it. Nardelli knew him when he worked at GE. So when Nardelli took over at Depot, he brought Frank in. And Frank was our strategy guy and also our ancillary services like credit card and stuff. So when we decided Bob had to go, I called Frank up and I said, Frank, you're it, suit up. And he said, well, how much time do I have to think about it? I said, you got 3 hours. And he took the job. And Jim, all I can tell you is I would put Frank Blake up against anybody as a CEO in any industry I've ever known. He's got great empathy for people, especially people. He has the capacity to take this enormously big intellect and gear it down to let the newest kid who barely got out of high school feel like they're equals. And that, in fact, in many respects, that kid knows more than Bob does. And Bob makes sure that that kid understands that. He instills confidence in people. He instills a sense of worth in them. The greatest thing you can do for somebody, Jim, is to let them know they matter.
Yeah, that's come out a few times in our conversation. And it's not just the little people, because I remember sitting in your office and seeing a handwritten card that you got from Frank that still means the world to you.
I have it framed. Frank and I would talk at 6:30 every single morning, counting Saturdays and Sundays. Because he was brand new. He had no retail experience. He was thrown into this job. And I just knew he had it. He had wisdom. He had humility. And that's the other thing, Jim. Of all the things I would pray for that the good Lord would endow me with, which he probably hasn't done, would be humility. There's nothing more rewarding or nothing more appealing to somebody else than somebody who's good but acts like they're not good. Our Lord Jesus Christ, how much more humble could God be than to die on the cross in our faith, right? And that's a powerful glue.
As we think about the world we're in now, we talked about the political climate we're in right now. I would ask you, you've seen a lot. You've been active in politics. You've been active in promoting people who you think have the right values, the right stuff, the goods, like Frank Blake. You knew, even though he didn't have the specific experience, you knew he had the goods.
Yeah.
And so as you look around today, I had a conversation with a fellow we both know and think highly of, Frank Luntz. And he scared me because he scared me about how concerned he is about the political climate in our country today.
Oh, my.
Because he thinks we're on the verge of some very negative stuff.
Jim, I couldn't agree more with him.
Is that right?
I think the polarization in America today, in fact, I met with Mitch McConnell 2 weeks ago, and I said, Senator McConnell, if you do one thing, if we get control of the Senate, I pray to God the first thing you're going to do is pick up the phone and say to Chuck Schumer, Chuck, let's sit down and let's figure out some bills and laws we can pass that are good for America, that both parties will get in backup. Let's show the world that we can work together. The poison in politics today is disgraceful.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Celebrations Chatter. You can join our community by reaching out at chatter@celebrations.com. And while you're at it, tell us what topics you'd like us to explore here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to share it forward.